In today's episode of our photography review show, we're gonna review landscape, mixed, and wildlife photographers. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of our photography review show. I'm sorry for the delay, we've been really busy last week, so in this episode we're gonna put all the pictures together and review them. Now, if you've never been here before, my name is Jacob Bors, and I'm a professional photographer based in West Sussex, England. For the past 7 or 8 months, I've been reviewing your photos, and I reviewed over thousands of images from hundreds of photographers. If you would like to join us in the future, all you need to do is to join our membership, Clever Photographer Plus. To find out how to do that and what are the benefits of the membership, you can head to our website, cleverphotographer.com. But now, without any further ado, let's jump into the reviewing. So as you can see, we are back in Lightroom CC, and that's where we're gonna be doing the reviewing. As always, we look at 3 things. The technical part of the image, we're looking at your camera settings and so on. Then we have a look at your composition, framing, composition, aspects of the image. And we usually finish it by looking at the photo editing and giving you some tips on what we could improve and what to work on. So we have a first photographer ready. Tina, let's go for it. Tina, we have 4 images from you. And from what I understand, one is a raw file and the second one is the file that is already edited. So that is actually very, very smart. So we can look at both of them. So we have these 2 sets of images. And I guess let's start first of all by looking at the JPEGs, because they are the images you would be presenting to your viewers. And then in the final part, we can have a look at how I would edit them myself. So let's have a look at this image. Let's jump into the information, or we use this one to start with. So the camera settings here, Canon R6, the lens 24-105, one of my favorite, I use it all the time too. ISO 200, 32 millimeters, f11, 1/90th of a second. So looking at the image, I think the ISO 200 is fine. I'm trying to stick usually as low as I can, so around 100. However, 200 is definitely not the end of the world. So that's perfect. 32 millimeters, giving you still quite nice wide view, however, with the less distortion, so that's good. f11, making sure that you have the sharpness all the way through. f11 for me is usually the kind of high limit of how high I go, but depending on the project, so that's good as well. And 1/90th of a second, giving you really nice exposure with obviously clouds and fog at the back still visible, and lots of details in the foreground. So as a camera settings goes, I think it's quite cool. I don't really see anything I would do differently, so well done on that. Now, moving on to this one, looking at the level of the details, I think it's really, really good. There is a really high texture and details in the sky already, so the details go all the way through, so that's really good as well. And I think just kind of looking at this, there is a little bit of kind of halo happening here, but that's probably done through the post-processing, so I don't think that's technically anything wrong. So looking at it like this, I think the light is quite interesting. It's not overpowering, so that's good as well. So altogether, quite nice image, Tina. I don't think technically there is much wrong here. Now, moving on to the next image, let's have a look. Same camera, but different lens. So this one is 100-400 millimeters, and from the camera setting, ISO 100, 100 millimeters, f16, 3/10 of a second. So ISO 100, obviously, again, coming back to the ISO, I think it's always a good choice. It helps us and make sure that there is no noise in the sky and the darker parts of the image, so that worked very, very well. 100 millimeters is a nice zoom. f16, yeah, nothing wrong about that. 3/10 of a second, giving you this really nice level of details in the sky, and still probably the ability to open the shadows. So I think all in all, the setup of the camera is fine. Let's have a look at your picture. So lots of details, lots of structure and details in the sky, details even in the shadows, so that's fine as well. So altogether, Tina, technically, very, very well done. Well done on that. So Tina, moving to the composition. Now, composition-wise, I wonder why you came from here to here, because here, obviously, you have lots of space. It's looking really good. Everything is pretty much straight. And here you kind of put everything in a much smaller frame, cutting some of the edges. I think that's a little bit of a shame and something I would probably rethink. So starting from the beginning, I'm always looking at the straight horizon and as much straight lines as possible, even on the structures. So the first thing I would do is, in this case, I would use the rule of third, where in this case, because you obviously trying to show most of the sky, I would use 2/3 of the sky, 2/3 of my picture for the sky, and 1/3 for the ground and the structure. So we could go up a little bit, however, not too much. I would still like it to be probably somewhere around here. Once I'm happy with that, I can hit enter. And then I can move to my geometry, and in a geometry, try to make sure that everything is nice and straight. So we can start by just using the auto and see if that will help us a little bit. And actually, I think the auto does quite a good job making sure that everything is straight, including the structure. And this is where I would start. Now, there is quite tight crop to the tree, which is not a big deal. If you would really want to remove part, you could remove it here, but definitely not that close, maybe just somewhere around here. This is how far I would go. If you would really want to make it tighter like you do, then I would get radius of this tree, and I would probably do more something like this. So again, bringing the sky down a little bit and probably going for something like this. So that way I'm hiding the tree, nobody knows it's there, I didn't crop it on purpose, and this is the kind of result we would get. But for me, let's just reset all of this. I would go for the one I showed you earlier, where now we just need to reset it again, where I would just go up a little bit and leave it like this. So this is it for the crop on this one. After that, I think the rest of the composition is quite good. The foreground created by the field, I think, works quite nice. The main subject on a horizon with the farm and the trees works very well. And your main subject and the main story is about the beautiful sky, which I think works very, very well. So this is about it. So on this one, little bit wider crop, I think, and that's about it. Now moving on this image. Now looking at your image again, I quite like, when I look at the raw file, I quite like the idea of the tree on the side, giving us the foreground element. But then I still think that big part of the story is the mountain here. Now I understand that this tree, of course, is here and it's cropped away. So that's a little bit of a shame. However, when you crop it to this degree, suddenly it's starting to be really about the tree. You're also starting to run out of space. So now you're getting something more closer to the square, which you could totally do. And that's what I would do. In fact, I would probably just go for the square after. So you would go for something like 1-on-1. And just gonna pick the right composition and go for something like this. Then it's about the tree. But what I think your picture is showing is something kind of between. You don't have the wide view and you don't have the square neither. So just kind of in between when it comes to the framing. I think the leading line of the tree working very well too. Shame again that we have a lots of cropping. There's a cropping of the tree here, cropping of the tree of the bottom. Just kind of try to take step back and capture everything wider, so then you have a more working space when you get home. For me personally, let's have a look. Maybe if we would go for something like 16:9, and I want the whole tree there, but maybe just something like this. What would it give us? Give us something like this. We already cropped the top of the tree anyway, so this is, I still want at least 1/3 of the sky in the image, so maybe something like this. Then our tree is here, so we could kind of push it a little bit more. I think maybe something like this. We could get a radius of this, probably just by using the healing brush. See if that will be able to do it. Yeah. Not greatly, but let's try it one more time. So if we make the brush a little smaller. See, yeah. Something like that. Of course, you could kind of take it in a Photoshop and see if that would help. It's just an idea. It doesn't distract me that much. It's just much more panoramic view. Suddenly the picture is becoming about the tree and the mountains, and I think more is happening on it. So that's how I would crop it. That's how I would frame it. Foreground very strong, the mountains very strong. So altogether, this is what I would do with it. Now, looking at both of the images and talking about post-processing, I tell you one thing which strikes me right away, and that's a lack of contrast and also the amount of details in a sky. I don't think sky naturally is this detailed. I know personally when I used to start and I got a sky like this, I was really proud about it, really happy. So I would put lots of attention to it. But I think sky generally isn't really like this. So I think you're missing a little bit of softness in it. So that would be the one thing I would be looking at. Also, everything is really bright, like you have lots of brightness on the field and lots of brightness in the sky. So the eye is having a little bit of problem to kind of navigate and seeing what is the main subject. So let's have a look at this image right here. Let's just quickly run through what I would do on it. Well, I always start in optics, which are already on, so that's good. So then we can jump into the light, bring the highlights down, open the shadows, nothing too crazy. Now with the shadows, I don't go all the way. I like to keep an eye on it. I like to open them, but what I'm looking at is the darkest part of the image. So for example here, and I just want to make sure that I keep some details in it. So it's not black. So something like this. After that, I move to my whites and blacks, and by holding Option or Alt on my keyboard, I can then slide them up and down. And when I go up, you can see that if I go too high, I'm starting to get some of these yellow, red, and white spots. Now I don't want any of them because those are the area which are overexposed. Then with the blacks, I can bring the slider down. Let's say do something like this. Again, similarly, I can hold Alt or Option, and I bring it down until I see some colors. Now with the blacks, you can have a little bit of darker areas. Usually something between 1 to 5% of the image works very well. A little bit of contrast, definitely. And with the exposure, you can just hold Shift, and click on exposure and see what it's going to give you. Usually Lightroom overdo it, so we just bring it down to about half of the value. So I'm happy with the light curve. We don't need at the moment, so we can jump into the color. In the color, let's have a look at the white balance. So we have some presets here. Daylight, a little bit too blue. Cloudy. Cloudy is looking quite natural. Now we can add a little bit of warmth, but very carefully. A little bit of magenta on tint, and maybe just a little bit of vibrance. So that's about as much as I would do on this one here. Maybe a little less warmth. Anyway, once we're happy with this, we can close the color. Of course, we could do some details, but I don't need to go through that. This is pretty much as I would do. Let's have a look at yours. I know you really pushed the sky. You could still do that. You could go into your mask. And in the mask, you could select the sky, see if it's going to be able to select it. And once it's selected, you can bring the highlights down a little bit more. You can also make it a little bit more blue if that's what you were looking for. And you can also dehaze it by using the dehaze slider. But you want to do it really gentle because you can see that there is a haze and cloud at this part. So you really want to keep the depth in the image. So you want to have your sharp and colorful foreground, and then very, very slowly going to the back where everything is kind of disappearing. That's what I would do. After that, what I would do, I would apply some vignette just to bring more attention to the center of the image, bring down the clarity to add a little bit of natural feel to the image. We can add a little bit of texture, and I think that's about as much. We could now do some dodge and burn, for example, by adding a new brush, increasing the exposure to somewhere around 0.4, and now we can paint over the areas where we want to add some additional attention. So in our translation, brightness, so maybe some of the, no. Okay, so we create one more brush, and not that strong, maybe just somewhere around +2. And if we want, add a little bit of attention there. And that's about it. Now, if you would want to further, you could play around with the local adjustments. However, I think something like this looks a little bit more natural and realistic to my eye. Nothing wrong with yours, it's your explanation. However, I would try to see how I can keep the sky as natural as possible. And in my translation, that's less details. Now, I'm not going to run through all of this again because it would take too long time. However, the idea is pretty much the same. We have everything nice and straight, and then you just go very quickly, highlights, shadows. Again, with the shadows, just keep an eye on your shadows and darker parts. Use the whites and the blacks. Then add some contrast, maybe a little bit of extra exposure. And then in a color, definitely add some magenta because the sky is definitely asking for it. Maybe a little bit of overall temperature up would be great as well. And then we can jump straight into the effect, bring down the clarity, add a little bit of texture, bring down the vignette. And what I would do in this case, I would create little linear gradient, drag it from the bottom and actually close the image from the bottom to add more attention towards the center. Then use the brush with some added exposure and highlight some of the buildings. So something like this with maybe a little bit of warmth, a little bit of magenta. And then finally we can work on the sky, select the sky, where we want to bring down the clarity to make it a little bit more soft, add a little purple to it, add a little warmth to it, and maybe little exposure. We can also bring more the highlights down to make it more defined, and then end up with something like this. So I pretty much done the edit anyway, but just very quickly, Tina, thank you very much for sending your images to us. They're brilliant, love them both. Very lovely kind of countryside captures, and very, very well done. Now moving on the next photographer, we have Evgeny. Evgeny, 2 images today, Cat and Rose. So let's have a look at them, starting with this one and starting with the camera details. We have the Pentax K100D Super with the settings ISO 200, 210 millimeters, and 125 second of shutter speed. So it's looking very, very good. I really like the light. It almost looks like a painting, if I have to be honest, which is very, very nice. Obviously, the camera setting is spot on. I like the level of the depth of the field. I like the details. I like the light. I think it's very, very nice, really focusing on the center of the flower. I think that really works very well, and I think you're doing extremely well when it comes to flower photography, Evgeny. So well done. Moving on the next image, same camera, different settings, ISO 200, 85mm f8, and 125 second on shutter speed. Now, when it comes to settings, I think it's good. This again looks almost like on a painting, like with a canvas behind the cat, which is brilliant. Lots of lovely details, lovely light. This one a little bit harsher, but with the animals, I don't think it matters that much. Nice kind of dark shadows on this part of her face or his face. I think it's looking very, very cute. The level of details is great as well. And I think technically very, very well captured. Really, really nice. I really like all the details and the light, how it's captured with the texture at the back, and nice depth. Moving on the composition. Now I think the composition is quite fine. Maybe just a little bit too much space at the bottom. I don't think it kind of needs that much space on the top. I would balance it a little bit more because she's kind of sitting like this. You could probably go a little closer if you would want to, or you can leave it like this. I'm not really that bothered by it, or it doesn't really make any big difference, I think, in overall. So this is quite good, something like this. And as I say already, depth is quite nice. It's a little bit of a shame that the color contrast isn't here that greatly, but nothing you can do. Obviously, the biggest color contrast is between the ears and rest of the image. That is also one of the kind of brighter parts of the image. So it's this area which would attract the attention first, and I think it would work very, very well. So altogether, as a framing and composition goes, I think it's very cool. Now, talking about this one and a composition, and again, great depth. I think the framing is really nice as well. Obviously, upper part, what we could do here, we could crop it even more so if we would want to. I think this would look very, very cool cropped, like something like this. But it's just an idea and very much an artistic decision. I think altogether, it's looking good. The depth is great, the color contrast is great, the luminance contrast is great, and it's excellent work. Moving to the post-processing, nothing much I would add here. Again, maybe just try to bring some of the details back, maybe just by increasing something like a texture slider or something, just to make it a little less like a painting. But if the painting was the idea, then you've done great, and there's not really much else you can do to it. So very, very good job. Now, talking about this one, what could we do here? Maybe just add a little bit more contrast. I think that would be my suggestion, something like this. And then just locally play around with it and see what works the best. Maybe just a little bit of extra attention towards the face, maybe towards the ground, and that's about it, really. Evgeny, brilliant picture. I'm a huge fan of cats, so well done on that one. Really, really cool picture here as well. I think your flower photography really went up and it's just great. I'm really happy to see where you're going with it. Excellent job. Thank you for sharing your images with us. And if you have more of them, make sure you send them for the next week. Which brings us to Zdeněk. And from Zdeněk, we have two sets of images. So Zdeněk, 2 landscape images and 2 wildlife images. So let's have a look at it. Starting with the landscape. Starting from here, let's have a look at this one. Canon 600D with 18 to 55 millimeters lens. Now the camera setting, ISO 100, spot on, 18 millimeters, really wide, but it doesn't really make big difference on this image, so that works quite well. Just keep an eye on your edges with the wide lens to make sure that everything is nice and sharp. 9 on f-stop is good as well, details all the way through, especially on a day like this. 1/200 of a second, making sure we have details everywhere. So altogether, quite nice capture. I think the camera setting is good, very well done. Talking about this one now, moving on and looking at the camera. So 600D, is it the same camera? Same camera, same lens. So ISO 400, just a little bit high for this environment. 34 millimeters is a good focal length. F11, good, giving us the details again from here all the way to the end. And 1/200 of a second is a good shutter speed, even if there was a little bit of wind, to make sure that everything is nice and sharp. Now, I really like the amount of detail, so I think that works really, really well. I really like this one because I think the framing is really cool. Now, I'm not sure what's happening here. There's maybe a little bit of sky replacement or some adjustments which are a little bit visible. Also, the white balance doesn't really match here, so something to kind of look at. And the rest of it is great. Also, little glow on this line. Again, something to maybe keep an eye on. So between two of them, this one framing and composition is really cool. I like the foreground, then you have the lake, then you have the rocks at the back. The only thing I'm missing here, Zdeněk, is something that will give us a sense of scale. I'm looking at it, I'm thinking this is either super small, and I'm talking few meters, or this is huge because there's no birds, there's no animals, there is really just this kind of bush. So that's really difficult to say how big all of this is. So it would be really cool. And what is always helpful is to have some kind of element which helps you to recognize the size of a scene where we're looking at. Well, in this case, we don't really worry about it too much because obviously the bush is big and everything else and the little trees. I think that helps a little bit more. Both of them works very well. They have this kind of dominant foreground elements. A nice depth with the middle ground and background, nice sky as well. I prefer the light on this one compared to this one, but I really like the panorama here because I think it really gives a nice view to the viewer. To finish it off on a post-processing, I wouldn't do much here. I think the light isn't really great. I think that's really sharp, but I think the white balance is well chosen. The contrast is good. The amount of details and texture is well done. So that's about it for this one. On this one, I would keep an eye on this area if something is going on there. Also the glow here. And I would maybe check the dehaze slider, which is in effects as far as I know. And just maybe bring out some of this haze you can see all together. Definitely some vignette and definitely maybe a little bit of extra brush on this tree just to bring a little bit more attention to it with a little bit of extra saturation, I think would be my personal choice. So something like this. Now moving on to the animals. So we have this lovely animal right here. Let's have a look at the camera details and the bird building a nest here. So starting with this one, Canon 600D 55 to 250 millimeters with the camera settings ISO 200, 250 millimeters, f7.1, 1/400 of a second. So ISO 200, yeah, for the wildlife, nothing wrong with that. 250 millimeters being really zoom in. f7.1 for that kind of length of your zoom, I think works very well, giving you this really nice depth with some details still visible, which I think works very well. And 1/400 of a second gives you really nice details. So lovely, lovely capture, Zdeněk. Really, really like it. Very well done. Talking about this one, this was with your Nikon Coolpix. So I know the camera setting is a little bit different there. However, still ISO 140, nice and low, 89 millimeters. So nice zoom, f5, 1/250th of a second. How about the sharpness? It's okay. I know in this camera it can be a little bit softer, but I think it overall as a capture is brilliant. It's something what you don't see every day, and altogether a lovely, lovely image. So while we're here, let's talk about the technical details still and composition. I think the framing is great. I think it really works very nicely. I love the ratio you choose with the nest on one side, the bird on the other. Obviously, he's in the middle of building the nest, which is great. This is amazing, amazing capture, and I love it a lot. I like that the background is a little bit soft, giving us more attention on the main subject, and I think altogether it works very, very well. With this one, as I said, the details are great, the depth is great, and because there's such a nice difference between the sharpness of the animal and the background, it doesn't really matter that the color contrast isn't that strong. I just think that it works very, very well. So excellent job on this one as well. I think the framing is lovely. There is a little bit of extra space in front. However, the main subject and the story is clear, and I think it works super well. I also really like the light, which is very well handled here. So altogether, Zdeněk, excellent captures. Which brings us to post-processing, and to be honest, I wouldn't really do much differently here. I mean, what you could do, you could close the image from the bottom if you would want to, just a little bit, and it's all about adding more attention towards the animal. So I would just maybe bring the exposure down a little, bring more attention, something what human eyes wouldn't even notice. However, it would guide them more towards the animal. You could also paint one more from the top and just close it a little bit more, and that's about it. Brilliant. Now, talking about this image, I would again double check my dehaze slider and see if I can remove some of the haze. So I would do something like this, and maybe just a little bit of dodge and burn. So little extra exposure on the bird itself, and maybe the nest. And then you could do another brush, bring the exposure down this time, and just create a little bit of contrast into some of these areas here. Of course, that as always, you could end it up by going into vignette and adding a little bit more of it, and you would end up with something like this, Zdeněk. I love both the images. I like all four of them. Thank you so much for sharing them with us. It's always a pleasure to see them. If you have more, Zdeněk, make sure you send them to us for next week. Which will bring us to final photographer. We have Ken. Ken, two captures of this lovely red bird. So let's have a look at it. Let's have a look. Let's talk about it. So this is Cardinal. I'm assuming that's the name of the bird. Again, shot with Nikon Coolpix P1000. With this one is ISO 400, 359 millimeters, f6.3, 1/500th of a second. I think camera settings, the ISO is a little bit higher, but it's not a big deal. There is a little bit of noise. However, the bird is beautiful. There is still lots of details on him. 359 millimeters is really zoom in, so lots of zoom here. With the f6.3 giving us a really soft background, and 1/500th of a second still give us nice level of sharpness. There is lots of details on the bird and on the body. Probably the biggest thing that kind of bring me right away to the attention is the amount of noise, and it's something to kind of think of for the future. On this one, I'm assuming it's the same bird. It's quite nicely captured in the movement, so I quite like that. Again, with the details on the foreground, pretty much same camera setting. Still, what I like is that you can still kind of recognize the bird. It's not just a kind of like a paintbrush, so I think it looks really cool. I would maybe just adjust the geometry and be done with it. When it comes to the cropping, I wish there was a little bit more space in front of him here, because I think that would work a little bit better. But other than that, it's still a lovely image. Again, as I say, the contrast of the colors with the bird works really, really well here. And I think it's a great picture. Together as a set, it's great. I think it works super, super well. I really like what's done with the color and the contrast. It's really clear, and you could easily put them next to each other. What I would do, I would maybe double check the noise. You could do that by using the details tab here. Maybe just add a little bit of the sharpness and a little bit of the noise maybe same amount. That would be one thing. After that, you could also in effects add a little more vignette. Again, just adding more attention towards the bird itself. Similarly here, if there would have been any way you could get a little bit more space in front of the bird, I think that would work really well. A little more vignette, I think definitely. And maybe a little linear gradient from the bottom with some minus exposure, just to close it from the bottom and bring more attention on the main subject. To finish it off, I would just make sure that everything is nice and straight by going into geometry and using the auto, and if not auto, then using the guidelines and doing something like this, just to make sure that we are nice and straight. And that's about it, Ken. Great 2 captures, great set of images. Love them both. Thank you so much for sharing them with us. And thank you for sharing your images. Now, if you want to join us, make sure you send us more pictures for next week. And the same goes for all of you folks. If you want to join us, make sure you check out our membership at cleverphotographer.com. You can find out more about it there, as well as all our photography products. For today, thank you very much for watching. You have a great rest of the week, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.